Welcome in. It is the Daily Roto Sharks football podcast. I'm Jeremy Kahn. Good to be with Justin Carlucci here, talking a little football in week 3 of the preseason. So if you're a football fan and you're going to the games, this is the game you want to see because the starters will play a little bit longer. I do think more people are going to dabble this week in preseason football than usually would just because they feel like they have a better grip on it. I mean, I played week 1 a little bit just because it was exciting. It was back. And I saw people like David Johnson with 5% where, I mean, you're looking at it and you're going, guys, he's only going to play 3, maybe 6 snaps, so you need to hope he punches one in. But this week, most of your starters should get a full half and even into the third quarter. So I would tell people to definitely check the team's radar and see who's doing what, who's going to sit. And if there is somebody that's going to get an extended look, especially the quarterback position, you're trying to get some points. So, Justin, so far this preseason, we said this is week 3. We didn't get a chance to kind of catch up on week 2, but I want to get your thoughts on what you've seen thus far. Anybody exciting you?
There's a lot of excitement, man. I think you're going to see a lot of excitement down your way in Baltimore. Zay Jones is a hot commodity right now, the Bills receiver who kind of just got kind of thrusted into that number 1 receiver role. Obviously, Jordan Matthews still dinged up. Everybody kind of got blindsided by Sammy Watkins getting moved. So I'm excited to see. There's a lot of hype around Zay Jones, and I'm sure maybe you've heard some things about that game leading up to today and this weekend. What have you heard about Zay Jones, the Bills taking on Baltimore this week?
Well, the weird thing was with the Bolden retirement, because Zay Jones got a lot of comparisons to Anquan Bolden. So when they signed him, everybody was like, well, that's kind of odd. How are they going to work these two together? But Zay's been fantastic from what I hear, and all the people in Buffalo are raving about him. So is this going to be a darling? I mean, after, Galloway had that big preseason game for the Lions, I was laughing because somebody actually started to list the wide receivers, and it was Galloway, Antonio Brown, Julio Jones, Odell Beckham, because, everybody gets excited over preseason, what rookies are doing. But I think Zay's one of those guys that's going to have a chance to make some noise. I don't know, last year, Tajay Sharp of the Titans, right around draft season, everybody was talking about him, and I watched him go for a lot more than he should have in my auction, and I watched him go a lot earlier in some of my, standard snake drafts. But there will be some rookies to target and some guys the teams want to take an extra look at. So that's a way to definitely attack the preseason, in my opinion. And one thing I do want to say is, anybody that's playing preseason football and you're not reading Mr. Dong Detector himself, the Bonder brand right there on Twitter, Scotty, who writes for Daily Roto Sharks, I mean, he's been killing it this preseason. The guys that have been playing on there, I feel like they've won almost every single week. And obviously each week's different because you'll have a 3-game slate and then a 2-game slate like tonight, or tomorrow's slate is huge. That's why we're actually sitting here talking about it, breaking it down. When you look at Saturday's 7 o'clock, Justin, let's dive right into these games. So we got the Ravens and the Bills about Zay Jones and basically, what and thing I can be. Defense. I'm locking. If everybody's the same price, I'm locking in Justin Tucker. Ravens defense. The Ravens defense is going to be a top 5 defense this year. Mark my words. The front 7 is absolutely fantastic. They've had a couple young rookies kind of show up in the secondary that they really like, especially late in the games, because sometimes you get concerned that you get a defense, are they going to give up some points later in the game? This Ravens defense hasn't been doing that. They've been shutting teams down, and I expect it to continue against the Bills this week. And then on top of that, you look at Justin Tucker. I mean, this guy's money. I mean, he's the best kicker in the league, and you can actually make a case that he could be the best kicker of all time. Those are 2 guys, or 2 instances I'm locking in, the Ravens defense and the Ravens kicker. On the offensive side of things, maybe you look at a Terrence West, a couple wide receivers we really haven't seen get going early on, Jeremy Maclin, Mike Wallace. It all depends. Ryan Mallett's looked like just a turd. He sucks. But that being said, if he's going to get more time, then maybe that's something you target. And people in Baltimore are really excited about Woodrum, an undrafted quarterback that's been cleaning up in the second half. I think last game he had 2 rushing touchdowns. So give me your thoughts, Ravens and Bills.
Yeah, like you said, that Ravens defense is definitely impressive. And I think if you're a person that's going to run more than 1 lineup this week, I think Zay Jones will carry his ownership. But I think it is risky going against the Baltimore defense that has looked pretty good. And I know I'm preaching to the choir, and you've seen it firsthand. So, if you're playing 2 lineups, maybe throw Zay Jones in one. He's going to carry that ownership. And then maybe, I don't know if you want to call it contrarian, but it probably will be. Because, Buffalo wants to see what Zay Jones is made of. He's ready to see that workload. And, it's not often you see a 2nd-round pick kind of carry all the weight of the receiving core. I mean, but nobody else is healthy there. Who else are they going to throw the ball to going into the week 1? I don't even know what Charles Clay's status is. So, but that Buffalo team is going to be very run heavy again. LaShawn McCoy is obviously going to get his work. So going into the regular season, I don't know. Do you see Zay Jones cracking 1,000 yards? Not many rookie receivers do. So as crazy as it is, I think Buffalo might be more run oriented than they were last year. And they were first or second in the league in rushing attempts. So honestly, there's not too much I'm going to target in this game. I don't see a ton of points. Do you?
As far as this game, I don't necessarily see a ton of points. That's why I said kicker and defense. That if I'm looking at Baltimore, I think Zay Jones is one of those targets because, when we talk about teams like San Francisco, the Jets, which we'll get to next because New York's playing New York, and you look around, you're like, man, who the hell's catching passes there? Somebody has to. San Francisco, Pierre Garçon, they signed him in the offseason. That's a guy that you think is going to, catch 75 to 100 footballs this year, depending on how things go. In New York, if you're in a PPR league, you might look at Bilal Powell, and somebody's got to get fed the football there. There's not a ton. And so, Zay Jones might be a viable option, but again, I think he could be rather chalky. Let's move on to the Giants and the Jets. Real quick, though, I do want to kind of throw out the totals because I think it kind of gives you an idea of what Vegas thinks as far as scoring goes for the game. It's not a definitive, answer. It's not like with the Ravens total being at 39. It's not like, hey, they're going to score 39 points, but Vegas is right more times than they're wrong as far as being on the number. So the Ravens, Bills, that's 39. Let's move on to the Jets and Giants. Total in this game is 37.5, and the Giants receiving core is all banged up. Brandon Marshall got banged up in the last game. More importantly, Odell Beckham had everybody scared. I just did a fantasy draft the night that happened because we all were on here. We had some technical difficulties. We were going to record, and we were talking about the Odell Beckham injury, and it looks like he may even miss week 1, so something you have to keep your eye on. If he ends up playing, there could be a ton of low ownership, and if you're feeling frisky week 1, that may be a route to take. But just looking at this game, Jets and Giants, you looking at anything on either side?
Yeah, I'm actually liking Evan Ingram quite a bit. You nailed it. The Giants receiving corps is seriously dinged up, and they're not going to want to roll the dice too much for some of these pieces. Sterling Shepard, I don't know how far he is. Talk about a scary sight was Beckham going down last week right after he looked into the eclipse a couple hours earlier. But just to touch on what you said earlier about starting quarterbacks specifically getting more time, Fantasy Pros had this really cool chart from 2016 preseason, and from week 2 to week 3, quarterback ones or starting quarterbacks played about 16% more in week 3 than they did in week 2. And the QB2s were kind of 5 or 6% different, not much. So like you said, there can be a case to, if you're plugging in looking for some starting quarterbacks to play this week. Going down the line later, I think Jameis Winston against the Browns is probably going to be a chalky play. But, Eli Manning might get some more reps. Who knows what the Jets are going to do. But if you're looking at the Giants, and I think Geno Smith will see a lot of second half time. If you want to play the narrative of the week, it could be Geno Smith with the Giants, and I do like Evan Ingram. The Jet side of things is really interesting. Robbie Anderson a couple of weeks ago played a ton. Last week he didn't play much at all. The Jets are just kind of a mess. But from a regular season perspective, you kind of hit it on the head with Powell because he's a guy who can catch the ball out of the backfield too. And I could see the Jets checking down quite a bit again this year. So not too much on the Jets side this week for me preseason-wise. What about you, Jeremy?
Yeah, I mean, I find it difficult to sit there and if this is the closest thing to the regular season, I'd like to see a little bit more from the Jets and try to figure out where they're looking to throw the football to. As I said, Bilal Powell, it's a guy I'm going to look at, but with Matt Forte there early on in the season, I'd rather wait until later in the season to look at a guy like Bilal Powell just because I feel like we'll have a better idea that he's going to get featured a bit more. And with Matt Forte's age, it wouldn't surprise me to see him break down just a little bit. And on the Giants side, we were talking off the air, and I said I really like that kid Ingram for the Giants, a young tight end, and especially with all the injuries in this game now, that he could be an absolute target. We know about Sterling Shepard got hurt early in the preseason as well. So you just kind of wonder what the wide receiving core is going to look like for the Giants coming into this game. And if you're going to rely, because look, some people are going to target the second half and go out and try to find some guys that are going to split time and be able to attack the 3s and 4s of other teams. But I do think a majority of the people are going to come in and try to take the starters and build up their cores early and hope like hell that they hold on, So, and with Eli Manning, that's another interesting one. I don't know, and I'm not trying to sidestep anything. I don't know what to expect from the Jets at all this year as far as their defense, their offense. There's a few guys that I'll target in fantasy to take a flyer on, but I'm not taking them early in drafts. But as far as daily fantasy goes, it may be a wait and see approach for me.
I was going to bring
Let's
up.
move on. Arizona and Atlanta. I do think Matt Ryan's going to end up being chalky in a few of the pieces of this offense because actually in game 2 they put up some points and people were all over them. Give me your thought, Atlanta, Arizona, if you're looking at either side here.
Yeah, I'm waiting. I love this Hooper kid at tight end. I think he's going to see some more action, and I think if the starters are slated to play more, I think you can see Hooper being kind of a nice, maybe contrarian play at tight end this week. Especially, I'm sure a lot of people will be on Ingram and some other guys. I'm looking at Hooper at tight end, but like you said, that Arizona, the first team offense with Matt Ryan could be a little chalky. What are you looking at from the Cardinals standpoint?
The Cardinals, it's interesting because they have all those downfield threats. And, we're talking about Arizona, Atlanta. The total in the game was pretty high at 43.5, which that's high for preseason, obviously. So I do think we're going to see some points and teams moving up and down the field. But when you look at guys like John Brown and J.J. Nelson and guys that can get down the field quick and obviously get to check and see, how much they're going to use those guys in the game. And if I'm going to play preseason football, I'm going to read reports all the way up until an hour before kickoff to find out what the latest news is. Because the worst thing is, it's just funny to me to look and see scores of like 65 and feel good about it in preseason football because, that may be a winning score. I saw some previous this week from some guys at Daily Roto Sharks where they were scoring 80. I mean, they really have been killing it on it, and the content's been free for most people. So, for people to check out. That being said, on Arizona's side, I mean, this might be a week where you take a look at David Johnson, but I'd probably shy away from that and try to find one of these younger guys going to get a few more carries. But I do believe we'll see points in this game, so it might be something to target.
Yeah, and Atlanta's a team who they lost their number one corner to. He got suspended PEDs earlier in the offseason. So, I mean, they're hurting in the secondary. If there's any place to pick on the Falcons, it's probably on the outside there. And J.J. Nelson kind of a couple of weeks ago, we saw Bruce Arians name him the number 2 receiver. And, we got to see what this kid's made of. And like you said, John Brown, one of these two could easily get loose in that secondary. Vegas has that game pretty high, like you said. And, yeah, one of those two guys are worth a look, I think, as well.
Yeah, and, that's the hard part for me in trying to figure out where they're going with the football from a week to week in daily fantasy. Because I know about was it last year, maybe at the beginning of the year or the year before that, I played John Brown a ton. I think it was last year I was playing him, and then he ended up getting hurt. But he's a guy that you realistically only need a couple targets because his pass receptions are usually they're bombs down the field. And you're hoping he gets in the end zone and you get all your points that you're expecting to get. Because those guys are typically relatively cheap. And if you're going to go spend money on running back during the regular season for DFS, you're going to try to find some value plays, and most importantly, guys that can get in the end zone or get a ton of targets. And John Brown and J.J. Nelson were clearly guys like that. And Carson Palmer, another year removed from a knee injury, see what he has. If he can get it down the field, a lot of people think he could be a sleeper in regular fantasy football season long. But as far as DFS, he might be a guy that I target here and there depending on who they're playing.
The guy just doesn't quit, man. It's amazing. It's amazing. He's been around so long, and he's battled through so many injuries. So Carson Palmer late in your annual.
It's pretty crazy. Let's move on to the Indianapolis Colts and the Pittsburgh Steelers. And interesting enough, this is 40.5. No Andrew Luck. The quarterback situation there in Indy is wanting, to say the least. The big thing for me is who ends up winning the starting running back nod. Mack has been killing it. I think he looks fantastic. Frank Gore's there. He hit that 30 plateau not that long ago. And, they say about running backs over 30, they end up hitting the wall. Marlon Mack may be the guy that ends up getting a ton of carries. He's a guy that I like in this game particularly. But that being said, the Steelers wide receivers, Martavis Bryant and a handful of other guys, it all depends on how much, Big Ben plays. Big Ben and that offense may be something I end up targeting.
Yeah, the wide receiver position is definitely crowded. There's a couple guys vying for those last couple of roster spots. You look at Justin Hunter and Hayward Bay, Sammy Coates, Eli Rogers. Someone's going to be the odd man out with Bryant reinstated. I don't know if that's a place I'm willing to to put a lot of money on this weekend, in preseason, because you just don't know where the ball's going to go. But James Conner is probably going to be the highest owned running back on the slate, and probably for good reason. He had 20 some odd carries last week. He had like 90. What do you have? 190 or 100 yards. And Mike Tomlin this week kind of called him out in a press conference, bashing his special teams play. So we'll see how Conner responds. But with Bell still holding out, and prior to last week, it was Toussaint and Conner are going to split the workload. Didn't look like that according to the box score, did it? So James Conner is virtually a lock, and if you don't play him, you're probably treading in some hot water, especially against that Colts front seven that has some holes.
All right, well, let's move on and talk about the next game. The Cleveland Browns. I was joking with CG, our boy from Daily RotoSharks. Hopefully he's watching. I told him I called him on Wednesday, and I said, "Are you headed to the parade? The Browns are 2-0 in the preseason. You got to throw something for them because they've been god awful for years." But you look at this Browns team in daily fantasy. It's a team that especially during the regular season, I like to target because there's always those opportunities if they're behind to get some junk touchdowns, and depending on the matchup, could be something interesting to target. And Tampa Bay is a darling right now for a lot of fantasy fans. There's so many weapons there: Mike Evans, Deshaun Jackson. Wondering how they use O.J. Howard, the running game, Jacquizz Rodgers in the beginning of regular season. He'll be a guy that I know a lot of people are going to target because he'll be cheaper, and with Doug Martin suspended, he'll get some opportunities there. And just a handful of offensive weapons. And Jameis Winston, he's the darling this year. They're on Hard Knocks. I think there's a chance that we'll see some ownership here from this game, especially on the Tampa Bay side of things. The over-under is 41.5. Where are you looking? Anywhere in this game?
Yeah, you're definitely going to see Winston with his ownership. He threw the ball 29 times last week. He's probably going to see a lot of playing time this week. Him and Evans appear to be on the same page. There's some ownership for good reason. But, yeah, man, everybody's drinking the Tampa Bay Kool-Aid, specifically Winston and Evans this season. But look at the Brown side, dude. I mean, there's some places to target there, too. What do you think of Deshaun Kaiser already getting the starting nod at quarterback week 1? And do you like him, this weekend at all? Of course, I still want to, get a good look at him. It was a weird situation. Number 1 quarterback. They already announced it. Do you want to, have a chance of risk an injury? No, but you want to get him as many reps as he can before week 1 rolls around.
Yeah, when you look at sorry, it was breaking up on me just a little bit, but when you look at Deshaun Kaiser getting the starting nod in a preseason game, I think it's it's fine. You want to take a look at him, but he's the Browns start the season against the Steelers. I don't know that I want to throw a rookie quarterback to the fire against a team that's going to come out, blitz the crap out of him, knock him around a bit. I'd let him. There's no reason to rush, and I think it's perfectly fine for Browns fans to like how their team looks right now. But the bottom line is you have to weather your expectations. I think they attacked the draft right this year. But there's no reason to rush Deshaun Kaiser. I do think you'll see him play quite a bit. So if you want to target him just because of playing time, nothing wrong there. And I like Tampa's defense a little more than most, but it's not a defense that I'm scared to attack or anything like that. You'll look at that and daily when we're talking about DFS when the regular season starts. But Kaiser's a guy that I'm not personally. If I'm the Browns, I'm not starting him right off the bat. But there's nothing wrong, even though preseason week 3 is the week that you really want to start looking at your starters and getting a good look. They're just trying to figure out what they're doing. Brock Osweiler sucks. The same thing in Baltimore. Ryan Mallett's terrible. But we know what those guys are. There's nothing wrong with them holding a clipboard, and if you need them for 2 or 3 games to come in and say, hey, just don't screw it up. But I think that's what Cleveland should do. Just kind of weather the storm a bit and then slowly bring in Kaiser. He's a guy that's still very, very raw.
Yeah, I like him for week 3. Like you said, regular season, I'm obviously staying away, seeing what happens there. But this weekend, Kaiser should get a lot of time. And, man, Brock Osweiler and the phrase "don't screw it up" in the same sentence is pretty scary. I still can't believe they went out of their way to get him. That blows my mind. But I agree with you. They did attack the draft, I think, correctly, too, and they made some strides. They definitely went in the right direction.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the – look, I host a sports talk radio show, and it's one of the biggest things I scream about every year. Like, to me, it's still hilarious that Bears fans are going nuts because of Mitchell Trubisky and what he's done thus far in preseason. It's like, wait a minute, guys, pump your brakes. He's doing it against 3s and 4s. It's awesome. But the Bears still – I don't care if Trubisky turns out to be a good quarterback. I'm not even saying a great quarterback. If he turns out to be a good quarterback, we were talking about Blake Bortles after year 1 and year 2, and now everybody wants him out of Jacksonville. It's like, this guy is terrible. And I said it from day one that I wouldn't have drafted that guy in the 1st round. It's just funny to me because it's the most important position, how much teams reach on quarterbacks. And the Browns this year did not reach after taking the likes of Johnny Football and going back to Brandon Weeden. Remember when they gave up their spot and gave up Julio Jones to go get what it turned out to be was Justin Gilbert, and I think it was Justin Gilbert that year, and of course Brandon Weeden. And both those guys turned out to be absolute turds, So neither one of them on their team. And the Browns, I think that year's draft class, everybody is off of their team. So now, reevaluating, trying to do it right. And I know we're talking daily fantasy sports, but I think all this stuff does play out in the long run when you're trying to find value later on in the season. So let's move on to Oakland and Dallas. Dallas, it's another high total, 43.5. And you look at Dak Prescott and this offense, Des Bryant, how do they build a relationship? Is he going to be the main target? I read a report earlier this week talking about Cole Beasley may actually lead that team in receptions this year. If you're looking for PPR, we'll see if they're hooked up on the same page, how they're running. Zeke should be, you talk about how the backs look and who gets the bulk of the carries. That'll be an interesting team to look at. And then on the flip side, you start looking at the Oakland Raiders and their starters. People very high on Derek Carr coming back. Crabtree looked great in the open field. He had a nice little catch and run last week. Amari Cooper's an absolute stud, and I think he takes a big step forward this year. If you're looking at the starters and that's a route you want to go, maybe you're looking at those guys. You see anybody else that you're interested in? And, oh, by the way, Beast Mode's back, but I don't know that I'm going to have him on my roster. I'm just waiting for that thing to blow up, but that's me personally.
Yeah, actually, I host a sports show once a week too, and I said yesterday, my co-host is a Raiders guy. I said, dude, what's your gut on Beast Mode? The guy hasn't played football in over a year, and I think people in annual leagues are a little too high on him, man. I'm not sold on Beast Mode yet. I mean, I don't know if he's holding that second, late second round ADP. I'm not sure I'm taking him there. But for this week, I'm looking at the backs behind him. Washington is a speedster who can surely break one loose. He's definitely worth a shot. You'll definitely find some decent ownership on him against the Cowboys this weekend. But I'm curious to see how Prescott handles the Cowboys offense, man, without Zeke for, 6 games, maybe less. Have you heard anything on the Zeke situation?
Me personally, I think they'll appeal. I think they'll get it down to 4. I mean, it's been the NFL's MO to kind of reduce it a game or two. 6 is very, very steep. And, what a lot of people are saying about Ezekiel Elliott is it's not just the one incident. There's 3. There's him allegedly punching the guy at the bar. There's him pulling the girl's shirt down. There's also the domestic violence, which is the biggest of the 3 because the NFL when you go back to what happened with Ray Rice and the video of him, there was a lot that the NFL before Ray Rice was, and I'll say it, he was blackballed by the league. Teams didn't want to give him an opportunity because, again, you saw the video, and I don't fault teams for what happened with him. It's one thing to hear there's a car accident. There's another thing to see it live. And that what happened with Ray Rice, and look, personally, I did work here in Baltimore with Ray Rice, and all the things you could say about the guy. He was one of my favorite people on the Ravens. So I was torn up, and it was very difficult to talk about because if that had been my daughter, my sister, whatever, mother, whoever, I would have wanted to go after the guy. And at the same extent, I know him a little bit more on a personal level, more so than most of the Ravens players, and he was one of my favorite people. He was always nice. He's doing a ton of charity work here. But again, I don't know. Can one moment define a player? If Ray Rice was coming off a season where he was averaging 4.5 yards a carry and not 3 or 2.8, whatever it was that year, he's probably back in the league playing for somebody regardless of that video because we're seeing Joe Mixon get drafted after his video. But all of that aside, the NFL came down hard on him, and who knows about the evidence? Like the NFLPA is appealing all this. I really believe it's going to get reduced to 4 games at a minimum. There have been some experts say they may get rid of the suspension totally, but I don't see that just because the NFL – they have this whole thing in place about the shield. If you're doing anything, even if you don't get busted, charged, whatever, somebody doesn't press charges, they can still suspend you because you're embarrassing the shield, the logo. And that may be what happens with Zeke. But I do think it gets reduced to 4 games. But, again, we'll have to wait and see.
I think the biggest guy in this game to target real quick is Rico Gathers. The guy just keeps putting on and putting on. People are already labeling him the next
player out of Baylor.
Yeah, people are already labeling him the next Antonio Gates. He has 2 or 3 touchdowns rated this postseason. 6'6", 285. He's already proven to be a matchup nightmare, and he's going to be chalky this weekend. So I would kind of maybe base your if you want to play some chalkier lineups. James Conner and Rico Gathers are 2 guys you probably need to label in.
Yeah, I don't know how much people are going to worry about ownership just because, I mean, it is a big slate and there's so many different ways to attack it. Again, we're sitting here talking about starters are going to play more than they usually do, finding the right ones because there are some starters that might get 20 snaps, might get 30 snaps depending on how it's going. And if their offense is on the field primarily for the first quarter, maybe they come out. I mean, they're going to get their allotted snaps. It just matters how they use them. For example, and granted, it's because I'm here in Baltimore, I'm watching the Ravens game. Ryan Mallett was supposed to play maybe a quarter, into the second quarter a little bit in week 2. And what happened was the offense was 3 and out for 3 consecutive series, and he didn't have any plays, so he ended up playing the entire first half. So sometimes that'll happen. And, with preseason especially, it's better to be lucky than good when you're trying to figure out who's going to get the bulk of the snaps. And, one score can really set you off in a player you grab. So I don't know how much chalk is going to bother people because there are a couple games that I think are going to be big targets. But again, if people are going to target the second half, that's interesting to me just because if I'm playing this slate, I'm probably going to look more at some of the young receivers that teams want to look at, running backs that I know are going to get some carries and play at least a half, and I'm going to target one of those big quarterbacks that, the Matt Ryans, maybe even a Dak Prescott, or who's going to end up playing more. If I read something ahead of time saying this guy's not going to be in the game, or he's only going to get 15 snaps, which isn't the norm for week 3. If I read that, then obviously I'll transition off that and go elsewhere. All right, let's move to the Packers and the Broncos. This is another interesting game. Late game, sometimes you want the hammer, and 42 is the total. We know Aaron Rodgers is very capable of putting up a bunch of points. The receiving core there, so many different weapons he can go to. It matters how much people are going to play. Ty Montgomery, Jamal Williams, the running back, is a guy that I liked out of BYU back when they drafted him. I think he might get a hefty look here. Montgomery's the guy they're going to use in their offensive sets, but Williams, if he doesn't fumble, could be a back that could see a bunch of carries. And on the Denver Broncos side, pick your poison. I mean, Trevor Siemian looks like he's going to get a bulk of the play there. Do you trust him enough to go to him? You've got some big-name wide receivers, and that running back situation's a little muddled. Give me your thoughts if you're looking at anybody in this game.
Yeah, this game's a little bit messy. I agree with you. I like Jamal Williams, too. It just seems like the teams are passing the ball a lot this preseason, trying to figure out where to trim that receiver's position. So I think there's a lot of directions you can go at running back this week. Looking at Montgomery, just something interesting was I know he played a lot of time at running back last season, a little bit of both, but he, at least on ESPN, he's strictly listed as a running back. I had one of my buddies come to me and say, hey, I'm thinking about keeping Montgomery. What is he listed as this year? I'm liking Montgomery in PPR leagues this year. We'll see how much time he gets this weekend from a DFS standpoint. But, I mean, even if you're looking to play in DraftKings when the regular season opens up, they're going to find ways to get Montgomery the football, I think. Are you high on Montgomery for the regular season?
Yeah, I like him. I think he's sliding in a lot of drafts. And, again, the way that they use their offense. We went over this on my show yesterday just talking about because I'm not a big Kirk Cousins fan personally. And I mean that. I think he's a middle-of-the-pack quarterback, and this is how this whole conversation started. I don't think he's a bad quarterback. I do think the Redskins should pay him because there's not a lot out there. But, people keep saying he threw for 5,000 yards. He also threw for 25 touchdowns, which, I mean, that's middle-of-the-pack to me. But anyway, I love the weapons he had last year. Things are a little bit different this year. And if Jordan Reed's healthy, then clearly things are different. But all that aside, I'm not saying I don't like Kirk Cousins from a fantasy standpoint. We were just talking about quarterbacks and who you'd rather have on your team. And I talked about him throwing for 5,000 yards, and we went over the top 10 guys as far as pass attempts last year. And, you're surprisingly, and maybe if you realistically think about it, the bad quarterbacks are the ones that actually throw the ball more. They're trailing in games. And so Blake Bortles was up there. You had a bunch of teams that missed the playoffs. You'd expect Drew Brees to be there. I thought Tom Brady would be higher, but again, suspended for a couple games last year. But that being said, Aaron Rodgers is always there just because of the way that offense is orchestrated. Now that Eddie Lacy's gone, I mean, Ty Montgomery played running back in high school, but he's a wide receiver. So they split him out wide. They don't mind constituting a short passing game for a running game, so he threw it a ton. But, if you went up and down, Joe Flacco was in that list of top 10 quarterbacks or top 10 pass attempts. And so on as you move down the list. And I think 7 of the quarterbacks we talked about were on losing teams that missed the playoffs. So neither here nor there in what we're discussing, but the fact that this was brought up, Aaron Rodgers is going to sling it. And I think he was the highest fantasy or highest scoring fantasy quarterback for daily fantasy last year on FanDuel at least. I don't know if that was how it played out in DraftKings, depending on, obviously the scoring. But all that aside, he's definitely a guy that Montgomery, they'll split him out wide, and now he's matched up with a linebacker or a defensive end, depending on what route he's running and how the defense is orchestrated. It's one of those outside backers, and he's going to beat him every time on route. So I do think he's going to get a ton of targets, and now we get to see a full season of it. So if you're in a PPR league, I think it's definitely a guy you should target.
Because Jamal Williams, who you just mentioned, was getting a lot of rumblings. He might challenge Montgomery for the spot, but we're going into week 3, and he hasn't done anything to blow me away. I mean, he's been solid, but right now it looks like it's Montgomery's job to lose. You're right.
Yeah, when you talk about Jamal Williams, so I do this thing every year where I pick my top 5 players that I like coming out of the draft because I'm a draft Nick. I would rather watch the NFL draft than the Super Bowl, which I know most people find weird, but I follow college football so closely that I enjoy it so much seeing where these players are going to go. And Jamal at BYU was an absolute beast. And you get some of these players at BYU a little bit older, a little bit more mature, so they slide in the draft. But definitely a guy that's very versatile and a between the tackles runner. And he's strong, runs upright with the ball. Things that you would like in an offense like that where you're probably going to see 7-man fronts as opposed to 8-man because you're dealing with Jordy, you're dealing with Randall, Devontae Adams, and now Martellus Bennett's there. So you want a running back that can run between the tackles. So some of that talk was brought up strictly because of, the style of runner that Jamal Williams is, and I understand why they drafted him. But he was on my list of 5 players, and I don't do the 5 best players. It's just 5 players. I'm intrigued to see what happens with them. But all that aside, I think that's why most of the talk happened with Jamal. But, Montgomery, he did a great job last year, and he kind of surprised us all. And most of the people that picked him up, you probably did well in your fantasy leagues towards the end of the season, and some leagues didn't know where to put him. So you could stash him as a wide receiver, running back. I think, was it Yahoo or CBS? I'm in so many damn leagues. I'm in, full disclosure, 10 season-long leagues. It might be 11 now with the one that CG started for the Daily Roto Sharks guys, so thanks a lot for that. But, that being said, down the stretch where you could play him anywhere you wanted. So if you had an issue with running back, you plug him in there. If you had a bevy of receivers, now you can play them all. If you needed more help at wide receiver, you can pop him in there. And this year, I think they're strictly going to keep him at running back. I don't know if you remember way back when Joe Webb of the Vikings,
of course,
where he was a quarterback. He was playing quarterback for him, but he was wide receiver eligible. So I remember the night that in a fantasy league I was playing a guy, and basically it was the night that the dome collapsed in Minnesota. So they moved the game to Philadelphia on a Tuesday night or wherever it was moved to. And that was Michael Vick with the Eagles. And Joe Webb was quarterbacking, but you could play him at wide receiver. And typically in leagues, quarterbacks are going to score more points than your wide receivers, especially if it was a PPR league. And I was playing a guy that picked him up and split him in. I was like, you son of a bitch. I was so mad because he skirted the issue. Nobody expected Joe Webb to start at quarterback. Anyway, we got 2 more games to get to, Justin. Let's talk LA and LA. Chargers, Rams. It feels weird saying it.
Yeah, man, that is weird.
Yeah, 41.5 is the total. And I love the Chargers this year. I don't know why. And I feel like in a lot of drafts, I'm trying to steal Mike Williams, buying low on Keenan Allen. I love Hunter Henry. I think he's going to be, you're going to see Gates kind of, and it happened a little bit last year, but you're hoping that Henry gets some of the red zone targets, that Gates gets phased out a little bit more, and we see Henry get a few more receptions. Who knows? Maybe they use those guys like New England used to use Aaron Hernandez and Gronk, where Gronk would make the big plays and the dirty work, and Hernandez would wind up with 7 receptions for, 80 yards or whatever, and every once in a while pop in the end zone. But you look at this Chargers team, I think they have a ton of weapons on the offensive side if they can stay healthy. And Phillip Rivers is a guy I love to target. I think the guy's absolutely filthy and, can make plays all over the field. Did lead the league in interceptions last year, so that does pop up from time to time. This Rams team, I love Cooper Kupp. I know he's questionable for Saturday's game. That's a guy that I think is going to get a ton of targets. And now with Sammy Watkins, very curious to see how he looks there because I think people are going to overlook him. Somebody, again, has to get the football. Goff does have a strong arm. I'm sure they're going to chuck a couple up to him, and Watkins can make some plays. And, oh, by the way, Tavon Austin, another shifty back, one of those guys that's frustrating in DFS because you don't know when he's going to have his game where he scores 3 touchdowns, rushing, punt return, receiving, whatever it may be.
Yeah, I'm looking at – you pretty much nailed it with the Chargers. And according to Eric Williams of ESPN, one of their beat writers, the Chargers are slated to play in the first half. pretty loose phrase there, however you want to take it. But if you're looking for DFS this weekend, Rivers didn't really get many opportunities in weeks 1 or 2. Not surprising. So this might be the week. And like you said, it's kind of rolling the dice. You don't know if you're going to get 3 possessions of quick 3-and-outs or a bum penalty kills your drive. But if you're telling me Rivers is going to play, 1 3/4 quarters or so, almost 2 full quarters, then he's the guy you can look at this week. And there's a ton of mid-tier quarterbacks in season-long drafts, and I'm loving Rivers too. I think the weapons are underrated. Clearly, Keenan Allen, he's already back on the field. I know people are scared, but ACL injuries can be freak things. It's not like the guy is, completely injury prone. If you can get him low, I'm loving Keenan Allen. But Hunter Henry, man, all of his advanced stats are matching up. Antonio Gates, we know how great he's been. He's an automatic Hall of Famer. But Father Time's catching up to him. And Hunter Henry, his advanced numbers were much better than Gates were last year in terms of success rates. And Phillip Rivers loves those big bodies over the middle. So I'm loving Hunter Henry a lot too. I know tight end's a deep position, but Hunter Henry, man, this might be a good week even in preseason. If those starters are going to play 2 quarters, you can see Hunter Henry get a red zone score for sure. And that's a good point about bringing in kind of the Aaron Hernandez, Gronk role, because that offensive line kind of stinks. Why not roll 2 tight ends out there, 2 tight ends that can both block and catch, have great hands, and kind of run the football in sets like that? I think that can give some defensive coordinators some real issues.
Yeah, let's move on to this last game, New Orleans and Houston. It's funny because when I look at New Orleans, I talked about that article I write every year of my 5 favorite players coming out in the draft. Alvin Kamara was one of them. Mm-hmm. And if you watched him at Tennessee, the guy was freakishly good. Could run you over, could run by you, playing in the SEC. Just like they could rely on that guy. The one thing that he did was fumble the football. And I don't know if you saw the last game he had a nice long touchdown run. Just a phenomenal player. But again, you're looking up at Adrian Peterson and Mark Ingram. We know New Orleans, for as much as people talk about New Orleans throwing the football, they run it. They run it a ton. It's just figuring out who's going to get the bulk of the carries. And even with, last year it was hard to figure out who was getting the ball. Did Ingram get put in the doghouse? But you did have wide receivers like Michael Thomas burst onto the scene, kind of become the number one there. Kobe Fleener goes down there. Is he more situated with Drew Brees and on the same page? It looked like they struggled early on in the season, but clicked a little later. And Willie Snead. I mean, and don't forget Ted Ginn Jr. is there. They'll throw the ball down the field. You gear up for that run, and they'll chuck it up there. So a lot of interesting pieces there. And on the Houston side of things, everybody's enamored with the quarterback situation there. And what does that mean for DeAndre Hopkins now? If you got somebody that can sling the ball, great. But, when you start talking about the wide receivers that they have there, it's a tough loss with the injury that they had, broken collarbone to Will Fuller.
Yeah.
But, I'm kind of interested to see what you like about the offense there. Fedorowicz is another guy that we talk about, cheap tight ends. He's a guy when I don't know that I necessarily punt the tight end position. I'm punting kicker defense from time to time during DFS, trying to find a good matchup that I can find value on. Kicker to me, if I got a guy that's indoor and I think it's going to be a high-scoring game, I'll go that route. If for some reason things map out and I can take a good kicker, and that can totally change if I'm playing in big tournaments. Most people won't spend up on kicker or defense playing in the big tournaments. They're trying to fit in all their players that they want to have. But, in cash games especially, I'm going to try to punt that position. But Fedorowicz was a guy that I would look at because it seemed like every other game he'd wind up with 4, 5, 6 catches and eventually punch one in the end zone. But Deshaun Watson being there, the one knock on him is that he didn't spin the football enough, didn't get enough rotations, didn't have an extremely strong arm. But so far, he's looked pretty good. I think, the hype machine's out, but a guy that you can definitely take a look at. And then obviously the running back situation there of who ends up winning out. Lamar Miller being the guy right now, but there's, it's a clogged backfield.
Yeah, Lamar Miller, a guy that really killed a lot of people in season-long league last year, but I think you can get him at a bargain price, and this is a guy who, in the right matchup, we've seen what he could do. And looking at for tonight, you nailed it. Kamara's a beast, man. I'm hoping he had a touchdown last week, had a couple of nice big runs, and you're not going to see a lot of AP tonight. You're probably not going to see a lot of Ingram. So I think this weekend Kamara's worth a look. Fedorowicz was a darling for me last year, man. He was always so cheap. You could stream him in the right matchups. And subpar quarterbacks tend to look to their tight ends the most because they're that big blanket over the middle. Fedorowicz is a great play, depending on what matchup he's in. I'm really hoping that one of these quarterbacks kind of finds his own. I hate, I'm a Titans fan. You're a Colts fan. I would hate to see DeAndre Hopkins with a good quarterback because that guy's nasty. I hope his prime isn't ruined by subpar quarterback play because, that guy can really fill it up. And he's probably going to fall in annual drafts because who knows what's Tom Savage going to bring to the table? When's Watkins going to get the reins over later in the year? A lot of question marks at that position.
No question. So we've run through all the games. Just real quick on, we're coming up next week when we do this. I think we're going to take a look at week 1 and kind of focusing on daily fantasy because I really want to get in depth and start breaking some stuff down. The one thing I learned, look, I host a sports talk radio show. My first time playing daily fantasy sports. You win some cash games depending on what you're playing. You got to beat one guy, but when you start getting into, and even the 50-50s, but when you get into the big tournaments, understanding where to attack, what the chalk means, differentiating your lineup. I mean, when you got 100,000 people playing in a tournament, you have to differentiate some way or another. But without the analytics, I would have been absolutely lost. And last year, I won a nice chunk of change playing daily fantasy sports by using analytics and looking at stuff. And obviously, Daily Roto Sharks with the sheets. In baseball, they've been on fire this week. I know yesterday they were absolutely killing it. And then you look at preseason football, even on the 2-game slate. I was looking in our chat, all the guys that won money playing what Scotty was talking about. So shout out to him. Definitely check out the sheets. Go to Daily Roto Sharks for all your info. And Justin, you and I will be doing this all year long. We'll have a few guests on along the way, and just look forward to breaking this down every single week.
Yeah, Jeremy, I'm really looking forward to the fall. Football season is going to be picking up. I know you said you're big on basketball. I had a really good DFS season last year as well. Made it down to Miami for FanDuel's World Final. Had a pretty good run. So the next couple of months is going to be exciting. And our team at DRS is nothing but top quality. Scotty and Billy Stacks, man, for baseball. He's killing it too. So if you guys aren't checking out these DRS articles for baseball, check them out and then follow us in the football season. It's going to be a great experience.
No question. All right, so we'll be back next week doing this again, and you'll hear us every single week breaking down all the daily fantasy slates that are offered with FanDuel, DraftKings, anywhere, no matter where you're playing. So feel free to shoot us messages. I'm at JeremyCon1057 on Twitter. What's your handle, Justin?
At the J Carlucci. You can find me on Twitter too.
Definitely check that out and shoot us some messages. You got any questions and give us some feedback. We'll be back again next week. Thanks, guys.